Again, welcome. It's kind of interesting how this group changes every year. I mean, we've just been doing this for 4 years, but there's quite an evolution. Oh, pardon me, fine. You're welcome. It's occurred since then. I mean, the first year we were all sort of having a lot of tire kicking and looking at new models and things, and now the market has matured quite significantly since then. So today we're going to take a little bit of a different format just to offer you something's probably a little more up to date. So let me start just by introducing some of the experts and manufacturers that are here as your resource today. We have Brett Hemphill. Brett, wave your arms wherever you are. There he is. Okay. Brett's got a KISS rebreather here today to look at. We have Jacob Brahashik. He's just unloading right now. He's got a hammerhead. We have Lamar Hires over here in the corner with the Optima. We have Steve Lewis, who's come all the way from Canada with a Pelagian. We have Peter Sodas. He's brought some Revos here for you. Peter, wave your arms. There you are. Okay. We have Jerry Watley, who's come with the Megalodon and some other new products from Interspace. He's in the back corner there, if you don't know Jerry. We also have Curt Bowen from Rebreather World over there in the corner, Advanced Diver Magazine. And even amongst this crowd here, there's a lot of other experts as well, and rebreather instructors. And so I want to keep this pretty dynamic and fluid today and do our best to meet your needs and questions. So just to begin, let me ask you, how many people are already diving rebreathers in caves? Okay. And how many people are shopping for rebreathers today? Hands up. Okay. How many people own or have owned more than one different type of rebreather? A lot. Okay. It's interesting that it's all the manufacturers. That's cool. All right, so we've got a little bit of everything. So at any point, please stop us, ask a question. Like I said, I want to keep this really dynamic and fluid. This afternoon, we're going to have some lunch provided by the NACD, and then we'll have an opportunity to be in the water in the afternoon. So people can have a chance to try a rebreather if they never have done that, or try a different rebreather if they want to check one out, or try a new product. Everybody here is here as a volunteer. All the manufacturers, myself, and everyone have brought their own equipment, and we're here at your disposal. So please take the opportunity to pick our brains and ask anything that you want to ask. There are no stupid questions, okay? It's an interesting point we're at in this industry right now. It's really been sort of 14, 15 years since the first commercial units were breaking out into the technical diving world. And back then it was a real guinea pig world. Well, today we've emerged into an industry that is obviously supporting quite a lot of different models, or trying to anyway. And there are more and more people diving rebreathers every day. So it's the one facet of diving that's still growing, and that's kind of exciting. And as we've seen in the last few years, it's the one aspect that's allowing a lot of new exploration to be kicked open throughout Florida and all over the world because of the increased range. Still, for me, every year when I get up in front of this crowd, there are issues that I want to bring to light, sort of pet peeves or things that worry me within the industry. And I guess that's what I want to start with for my little talk here this morning, is just some of the emerging and current issues. For me, I think a big thing is training and people shopping for training. So if you're in the market for a rebreather, whether it's your first or whether it's your next rebreather, I think you have to take a really careful look at who you want to teach you. Because it's such a new market, and because new rebreathers come on the market all the time, then obviously there's a lot of inexperienced instructors out there. And because of that, I think it requires a very open-minded approach from the instructor as well as the diver. Things that I taught 14 years ago scare the shit out of me today. We wouldn't dare do that today. So things have changed and morphed constantly within this industry, and it requires all of us, instructors and students, to keep a very open mind and be willing to change something that last year you said was an absolute. So take that approach when you're looking for an instructor. Shop for one that has adequate experience, teaching as well as diving. So they're out there doing the kind of thing that you want to do. I don't even begin to want to teach wreck divers how to dive rebreathers because I'm not out wreck diving anymore like I used to. I'm here in the caves, and so I'll obviously start in the open water with someone, but I don't really have any business going out and jumping on the Wilkes bar to teach a CCR trimix class in a wreck diving environment anymore. So don't ask me to do that. There are other people who are much more active in that sort of a sphere. So when you're shopping for an instructor, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So validate your instructor's experience. Ask them how many hours they've put on their rig, what kind of dives they're doing, and make sure you're picking someone that fits the kind of diving you want to do. I think another issue today is that customers who are shopping for rebreathers have a really tough job. If you're here today getting your first kind of look, this is a huge opportunity for you to look side by side at a bunch of different units. It's also a huge opportunity for you maybe to get in the water with a couple different units. Unfortunately, the water experience is going to give you only one thing, and that one thing that you're going to fall in love with in the water is, I want a rebreather and I love the harness. Today, dipping in the water, getting underwater, and not making any bubbles is not going to allow you to say, this rebreather is better than that rebreather. So bear that in mind. You're going to put on something that might not fit you today. It might feel like crap because it doesn't fit you. It doesn't mean it's not necessarily the rebreather for you. You have to be a very, very savvy consumer. And unfortunately, you have to kind of learn everything that's in a rebreather class before you're a savvy enough consumer to make a good choice about what you should buy. So it requires a lot of research, and it requires a lot of time reading books, and it requires a lot of time on sites like Rebreather World. But I can't help but think of Simon Mitchell. If anyone's ever seen any of Simon Mitchell's presentations around the world, Simon is an anesthesiologist. He's really one of the world experts on validating some of the CO2 research that's really significant for us in rebreathers. And when Simon talks about the internet, he puts up a photograph of what's called the Bristol Stool Scale. So if you're a doctor and you're looking at someone's crap, right, you actually match it up to the little picture and you go, okay, if it looks like this, that's not good. And if it looks like this, that's not good. And this in the middle is what it's supposed to look like for a healthy human being. And so Simon will rightly point out that, like the internet, this is not good and that's not good. So there's bad shit and there's good shit, but it's still all shit. Right? So the internet's kind of the same way. You got to take that with a grain of salt. And if you've been around the forums for a few years and seen the cycles go round and round and round and the arguments happen over and over again, you have to be a very discerning consumer of that information and back it up with some research as well, because there is a lot of shit floating out there. So it requires you to be such a savvy customer that's a big challenge. So how do you become a savvy customer? Whether you're shopping for a rebreather or validating the one that you're trying to use for a particular application. The podium I'm going to stand up on and stand hard on is third-party testing. So there's a lot of stuff being invented in garages, and there has been for the last 15 years. And those kind of people do drive innovation, and it's very exciting, and it's great. And I'm so happy to see the tinkerers out there doing what they're doing, because I think that's a necessary part of our community. However, when it comes to market, and it's sold to a consumer, it's life support. And as such, as a consumer that's about to buy something as expensive as a car, you deserve to see the facts, okay? And that's third-party testing. That's really important. It should be public and it should be documented. And I understand that costs a lot of money. And I understand that, a company or an individual trying to bring a rebreather to market may have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to provide that proof that this is going to support you at various depths and various gas densities. But I think you deserve it. It's life support. So very basic testing should include, if not full CE testing, then somebody better be showing you work of breathing. Okay, so resistive and hydrostatic work of breathing. They should be showing you documentation of canister duration at different depths and different gas densities. PO2 tracking over time. And then basic mechanics. So can the unit handle sitting in the Florida sun in or in the back of your car as it's baking in an afternoon, or cold water that you're about to jump into, or sitting on the ice before you're jumping into the cold water. It should be tested for its like sound mechanics, and then also failure mode analysis. By the time you've done those tests and documented that, you should be reaching a standard that's equivalent to CE. So I've heard some manufacturers complain that CE is an import tax, that it's something that's not fair to have to meet because it's a European standard. Well, there's opportunities to get involved in the making of those standards and opportunities to get revisions to those standards for anyone that wants to manufacture a rebreather. But if you can't meet the CE standard, then you should, in my opinion, be publishing and offering the information to the consumer so that they can have some reliability of what they're about to use in the environment they want to use it. So I'm pretty strong on that. The manufacturing process that the manufacturer uses should also be documented. It should be public and it should be documented so that you can have some reliability that the rebreather made today is going to look like the rebreather made tomorrow, is going to look like the rebreather made next week. And when there are changes made to the rebreather for one reason or another, new information, safety, whatever else, that those changes should be public, documented, and should reach the consumer. So sometimes it's frustrating if you're an instructor and every time you unpack a box of a rebreather that it's kind of a different configuration and you haven't been told that there have been changes. So that kind of information has to be public and documented, and you as the consumer have to demand it. We are a big enough market now to demand the kind of features that we want in a rebreather and demand the kind of accountability that we want from the manufacturer. And if we don't use our voices, then we're just going to be stuck with the next best thing, basically. It's still a pioneering part of our sport. And in the early days of cave diving, when everybody was whittling things out of wood and making up their own manifolds and everything else, there was the same slow transition. Well, I really believe that we're at that market size in order to demand a better rig. That being said, I don't want to give the mistaken impression that more is necessarily better. So we can look at the car industry and say, airbags and seatbelts made cars safer, didn't they? Do you think they made cars safer?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Actually, by documenting the safety, they determined that airbags and seatbelts actually made people drive faster. So the accidents didn't actually drop. So isn't that interesting? There's an additional safety feature, but because it changed the behavior of drivers, it didn't actually lower the accident statistics. And we can look at this scenario, too, of the airbag in the passenger side of the car. So after airbags came out, then we went, oh, crap, when these things go off and there's a small child in the front seat of the car, then the kids are getting killed by the airbag, right? So kids can't sit in the front seat of the car, or you have to turn the airbag off, or whatever else. So you take the kid in the car seat and you put it in the back seat of the car and you lock them in position, and then they won't get killed by the airbag. But they'll get forgotten on a hot sunny day because you're momentarily distracted and you left the kid locked in the car. So sometimes there are unintended consequences with more. So again, this just tells me that you have a very hard job as consumers, and I don't envy you. It was much easier just buying a rebreather in the early days when there was only like one that you could get. The next thing I want to talk about is human error. If we look through accident statistics, and God knows as cave divers and technical divers, we love doing that. We love going down and trying to figure out what happens so that we can justify why it won't happen to us and go to bed at night feeling better about ourselves. And most of the time, if we look at rebreather accidents, it always comes down to human error, human error, human error. Or, in the aviation industry, pilot error, pilot error, pilot error. But I think we're at this point where we need to be looking at what was the human error? What was the mistake? Back to the car analogy, how many of you have ever locked your car keys in the car? I think pretty much everybody has. So the question's been raised by some people, do you think you should have to die for that? It's a moment of inattention. So as we know, we're distracted, should we have to die for a moment of inattention? Or can we develop procedures and mechanics that can prevent these instances? And I believe so. So if we look at some of the most common rebreather fatalities, they're happening to really good people, really experienced people. They're happening to people who have many, many hours on the rebreather. So that has to tell us something. If we look at climbing for a moment, here's an accident that occurred. A very experienced female climber is preparing to go for an easy climb, and she's stepping into her harness, getting it on, she's lacing it up, getting organized. She reaches for the rope to tie into the harness when somebody stops to ask her a question. As they stop to ask her the question, she bends over and ties her shoe. She finishes the discussion with the person, leans back into the rappel, and falls 72 feet. Luckily, a tree breaks her fall. She's not killed, but she fell because she never finished tying the knot on the rope in the harness. And that tying the knot in her shoe satisfied the behavioral script in her mind, that automatic list of things that we do by memory because we've done it so many times. So in her particular case, experience contributed to the accident. And I believe that experience often contributes to the accidents in CCR divers, that it is that complacency that creeps in to our behaviors, and we just start to do everything by rote, by behavioral scripts. And when we get distracted momentarily, and as is normal, we do something else, sometimes that satisfies the script, and we move on through the process of preparation and make a fatal mistake. And that's how I believe these very experienced, sage divers are dying on rebreathers. So it might be that their oxygen is turned off. It might be that their PO2 control system is turned off. It might be that they entered the water with the high CO2, whether it's because they forgot to put the scrubber in or failed to check the seal, failed to do a positive or negative loop check. They might have had bad mushroom valves that they failed to check. They might jump in the water and get a loop flood. And then there's enough that are dying of hypoxia as well, whether they're not analyzing their gas, not turning on the oxygen, or any other number of things like not checking a flow valve. So there are many little mistakes that people can still make that can cause their death. Simon Mitchell gave another sobering statistic at Eurotech a couple weeks ago, and that's that if you own a rebreather for 5 years, 2% of you are going to die on it. Okay, that's pretty sobering when you look around the room and look at the faces around you, and I think that's something that we can't ignore, and I think that's something that we can't ever be so egotistical to assume that it can't happen to us. Every time I look at an accident, I go, oh crap, I could have done that. And I'll be honest with you, and I think anyone that presents here today will be completely honest to you in telling you that there have been times when we've almost killed ourselves on our rebreathers for human error. So can we do better? Can we do better in protecting people from these complacent mistakes? And I believe we can, and I believe it's becoming to the point where it's cost effective to do this because the market's growing to a reasonable size. So can we be monitoring the breathing rate, the gas use rate? Can we have rigs that turn on automatically, that detect breathing, whether you're in the garage or underwater, whether it's wet contacts, depth activation, or pressure changes, or PO2 changes that activate the rig? Carbon dioxide analysis, I think that is, and I'm going to talk more about this in a second, the next big wave that we've got to see in rebreathers. Can we have mechanical designs that guarantee the seal of the canister? Automated pre-dive checks, alarms, air calibration rather than oxygen, mechanical bypass systems, solenoid filters, HP sensors, any of those things. So I'm going to come down heavily on the side of automation can be your friend. And I know that there's other people in the crowd here that will come down on the other side of the coin, which is interesting, and I love to have these debates where they'll say, no automation, everything mechanical. And I think that's interesting as well. For me, with automation, though, I believe that it requires a certain level of the bar. Like, would you buy a car if you had to remember to turn on the brakes before you went driving, probably not. Right? So I think you have to look at the rebreather in the same way. If not through automation and increased safety in that manner, then there's certainly 98% of the fatalities that can be prevented by basic pre-dive checks, as well as a philosophy to the pre-dive. And again, I think most of the accidents that we look at, unfortunately, very few fatalities are found with checklists. So that would definitely be sort of top of the list for me, is pre-dive checklists. So whether those are on-screen and automatic or whether they're paper and check off, I'm okay with either of those, but I really think that I don't care how many rebreather dives you've done, you don't want to be doing a pre-dive checklist out of your head, because that's where the behavioral scripts kick in, and that's where you can make a mistake. And for all the years that I've been diving rebreathers, and I think for all of the years that most of the people in this room have been diving them, they're pretty diligent with those checklists. So written or software, either way. But if it's software, you've got to use it. If the software allows you to click past the checks, then that's not a good thing. So the Mark V rebreather had a really great on-screen pre-dive check. But if you just hit the button 17 dives or 17 times, you could skip it, right? So there's a problem with that, because I saw people turn on the rig and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they just went through the whole thing and they went diving. So on-screen software checks are great as long as it says, do a negative loop check, and you go, okay, and then it gives you a countdown timer and won't let you move on until that's passed. And I think that that's a much more logical way to handle on-screen software checks. So pre-dive checks, please, 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 no matter how long you've been doing this, please do it, and do it fully. And then once you've discovered that there's a fault, don't dive. And I know this sounds really crazy, and I know you're going to say, well, of course not. But I've been in so many scenarios with people where they failed just a little bit of the pre-dive check and they went diving anyway. And the decision to dive is really, really critical. There is no dive that's worth it. There was a fellow, he's not here so I can talk about him, last week. He was in the water with his rebreather and stopped momentarily to assist someone with hooking up an inflator valve on their rig. And he took the loop out of his mouth, but he forgot to close the loop. And so he helped for 5 minutes or so and bent over, and the whole rig filled with water. And he picked it up and went, oh, crap. So this guy hasn't even been underwater yet. And he goes, oh, crap, my rebreather's full of water. Well, I could just blow it through. It's not going to be a problem. Everything's going to be fine. So even in that egregious error, he puts it back in his mouth, tries to blow it through the scrubber, gets a mouthful of caustic cocktail, gets blisters on his tongue and gums, and goes, oh, I guess that wasn't a good idea. But then still blows it through and goes, well, gee, I wonder if I can just dive this. What's it going to breathe like now that all the fluid's gone? And he actually did a little bit of a dive, just breathing on the loop, going, wow, you know what, there doesn't seem to be any caustic in the loop breathing, and now that the fluid's gone, everything seems to be okay. Like, you look at that and you go, oh my God. How could he do that? But I see it all the time. One cell's down, one board's down, one handset's off, and people go diving. It's generally not a single point failure that kills someone. It's generally a snowball of events. And that snowball of events usually starts right here at the picnic tables when someone either doesn't do the checks or makes a decision to dive with a less than functioning rebreather. Another thing that'll save your life is 5-minute pre-breathe. But not just a pre-breathe with your nose blocked, okay? If you don't plug your nose or wear a mask when you're doing your pre-breathe, it's going to cause basically an auto recovery survival response, and your brain's going to sneak a little bit through your nose. Even though you don't notice, you're going to sneak a little bit and delay the onset of CO2 issues. So you've got to block your nose, either with a mask or plug it, and 5 minutes. I used to be a 2-minute pre-breather, I'll be honest about that. I thought warm climate, everything's fine, in a couple minutes it's going to heat up. But then once I had a thermal profile monitor in my rig and I could actually watch the scrubber coming online, I realized that it really is about 5 minutes before it's up to speed, up to temperature and ready to go. And in 5 minutes, if you're sitting down, concentrating and paying attention to the unit, You can look at the handsets. You have an opportunity to drop the PO2 low enough that it triggers the solenoid, and you have an additional confirmation that the solenoid's operating. So you have confirmation on all of the systems in that period of time because you've allowed 5 minutes to elapse. I think all of our lives are definitely worth 5 minutes of quiet before a dive. And that also gives you an opportunity to rehearse procedures or things that pre-visualize things that could go wrong on the dive. So that 5 minutes is a lifesaver. That 5 minutes shouldn't be happening as you're walking to the steps with the rebreather on. It shouldn't be happening in any scenario where you're in any danger if you pass out. Again, that's something I'm really, really strong on because I've resuscitated 2 people who were walking, one that actually got in the water and would have drowned, another that just passed out walking to the deck because things weren't working properly. And when you're walking around pre-breathing, you're not paying attention to your displays. So sit down, give yourself 5 minutes, concentrate, look at everything, and don't get in the water until it's working properly. So heed those warnings and abort. Bailout's always been one of my pet peeves over the years as well, an appropriate bailout in the cave to get yourself out. And there's varying standards in different agencies and there's varying practices in different individuals. But my personal preference is that I have more than enough on my own body to get myself out, and so do my teammates. And I think that's really important for a number of reasons. If I'm ever not with anybody else, I want to have enough to get myself out. But also, one of the key reasons why you are likely to have to bail out to open circuit and have no other option is for a CO2 related issue. And when you have a CO2 hit, you're going to use a ton of gas. So I've had one scenario where I brought someone 1,000 feet out of the cave on a CO2 hit, and even though they switched to open circuit, you can't imagine how much gas they used. It's horrifying. When you have a CO2 hit, it doesn't go away just because you switch to open circuit. It probably isn't going to completely go away for hours after the dive because your PCO2 is up and it's causing an uncontrollable urge to breathe and ventilate to correct the issue. And you can't control that with any level of meditation and mantra and everything else. It's undeniable. My neuroscientist here's nodding her head, so so I think she would agree. So CO2, I think that's the biggest unknown killer in rebreather divers today. And I'm going out on a limb and I'm not a scientist, but from my observations, I think that's probably the biggest thing that requires some research in the next few years. And let me talk just a little bit about CO2 and some of the issues you may not have thought about when it comes to CO2. Just diving alone causes your arterial CO2 to rise. Okay, so just diving alone does that. No matter whether your rebreather's functioning or breaking through, you will rebreathe some CO2 from your equipment and from physiological dead spaces. So whether it's from the dead space in your mouth or whether it's the dead space physiologically in your body, you will rebreathe some CO2. Okay? CO2 in the arterial level will also rise if you're a CO2 retainer. And we're learning more and more and more about who's a CO2 retainer and how that works. If your CO2 increases, then your normal reaction is for your ventilation to increase to bring it back to normal again. And that's very hard, like I said, for you to control mind over matter because your body's going, gotta get rid of it, gotta get rid of it, okay? But some people tolerate a much higher level of arterial CO2 than others in their body. And when they are able to tolerate that, then what that does is suppresses that ventilation response to get rid of it. Okay, so it's kind of like a cascade that occurs. So basically our bodies are a little bit lazy, and when we're working hard to breathe underwater already, it doesn't want to work that much harder to get rid of the additional CO2. And it says, well, okay, I'll put up with it. This will be all right. This will be all right. So diving apparently exaggerates this tolerance of CO2 for many of us. And diving also has been quantified to make us a little less sensitive to CO2. So CO2 sensitivity is reduced also by a rise in PO2, okay, by a rise in PN2, and by a rise in work of breathing. And I think that's one that's really, really critical to think about. So increased work of breathing is going to vary your degree of CO2 tolerance as well, okay? So if it's really hard to breathe on your rebreather, then that's going to cause a CO2 issue for you. And that's something that's quantifiable by test data. You can look at the curves on a work of breathing test and see whether your rebreather passes or fails at different depths. And something that passes with flying colors in 50 meters of water may not pass at all in 100 meters of water. So it's important to look at those tests in different depths. So the respiratory controller in our brain basically is tolerating higher CO2 rather than working hard to get rid of it. So one very clear example of this would be the David Shaw accident. Simon Mitchell, again with a series of 3 other scientists, contributed to a paper where they said rarely, but under very high work of breathing situations, the diver may not even be capable of ventilating enough to get rid of the CO2 that they're producing, no matter how hard they try. So when they reviewed the David Shaw tapes, the videotapes that were present, they could count his respirations, and he wasn't able to overcome the work of breathing caused from the extreme depths in that situation. So what does that mean to us? What are the consequences? Other consequences of high CO2 are increased narcosis and also an increased risk of cerebral oxygen toxicity. So is this CO2 contributing to some of the sort of mysterious convulsions and deaths of divers? Perhaps. I can't say for sure, but we do know that it's quantified that it will increase your risk of oxygen toxicity. So that's a good reason to shave back on your set point a little bit. And of course, CO2 toxicity in and of itself will cause significant cognitive impairment if it's happening to you underwater. If anyone's ever had a CO2 hit at all, it's really hard to get off the loop, really hard. The moment that you think something is wrong, you've got to get off the loop. Because if you let that progress, you can't tear that out of your own mouth if you're having an issue. So that'll eventually end in panic, drowning, and potentially death. So the person that I brought 1,000 feet out on a CO2 hit, it was pretty scary. He couldn't control himself. This is a very, very calm, collected, together diver who became somebody else in the presence of CO2 and in the presence, basically, of thinking he wasn't going to be able to breathe. Okay, so another issue with CO2, as I've kind of alluded to, is depth. So we all talk about basic canister durations and recreational depths when we take a recreational rebreather class. We usually are looking at the statistic that's based on perhaps 50 meters of water, but a lot of us are then taking those rebreathers significantly deeper without any update on skills or education beyond that. And the same scrubber at 100 meters is a significantly different situation, depending on the rebreather. So even at 120 feet, you could have a roll-off, like lessening of canister duration time of 50%. But in some cases, at 100 meters of depth, some scrubbers, and their test data will support this, are 1/8 as effective as they are in a shallow depth. So something to look at. And again, I'm never going to spout anybody else's technical data. Ask for it, look for it on the internet, ask the manufacturer for it so you're familiar with it on the rebreather that you want to use or buy. So CO2 monitoring, how do we do that? How do we deal with that? There's some rebreathers that have a thermal profile monitor or a temp stick, which is a start. Okay, so that's actually monitoring the heat of the reaction zone within the canister itself. That's a really good visual start. Now we've gone the next phase where we have working CO2 analyzers, infrared analyzers, sensors inside the rig of some rebreathers. It's a tough nut to crack because it requires a lot of power. It has to be in a place that's very dry, and the size of the sensor itself as to the size of the rebreather. But I think personally that this is a direction that everybody needs to go in, that we need to have gaseous CO2 monitoring within the rig. Another technique some rebreather manufacturers are using is oxygen metering. So if we can meter the amount of oxygen that's going through the solenoid or being injected into the loop manually, then we can quantify that and say this much oxygen should create this much CO2. So at least that deals with some of the issues of CO2. But what you'll find when you start to look at any one of those individual components with CO2 is that you're monitoring a different thing. You're either monitoring failure of the scrubber, or you're monitoring, amount of, oxygen created and theoretically how much carbon dioxide that should create, or you're basically monitoring breakthrough. But I think we're going to have to go even a step farther, because if you look at an anesthesia machine, they monitor CO2 at the mouthpiece. So they actually monitor on a deep exhalation when you finally get the basic equivalent of the arterial CO2 expressed into the mouthpiece. That's what's come from your alveoli, and you can only really measure that at the mouthpiece itself. So there's not that technology available yet, and I hope that comes. I think that's the next step. But somehow it's going to be hooked into the mouthpiece, and a pump is going to have to be added, and there's going to be a lot of new technology that's going to make that happen. But if we can't measure the actual arterial or alveoli or alveolar CO2, then we can't measure if you're a retainer. So as an example, the Sentinel does have a gaseous CO2 monitor in the loop, but what that's going to tell us is basically if the scrubber's failing and if the scrubber's breaking through. It's not going to tell me if I'm a retainer because it's not right at the mouthpiece. So that's information we're going to have to get in the future. So eliminating CO2 from yourself. Some individuals are going to respond better to CO2, or are going to respond better by ventilating the CO2 out. Some are going to retain. We don't know if we're retainers, and in the Navy tests that have been done to this date, we find that people retain CO2 at a different level on a different day at a different time. So it's a big unknown out in the industry. It's something we need a lot more research on. So CO2 monitoring at this point is imperfect, but it's emerging, and I think it's something that's going to be a really important change in the future. Another little issue that's kind of arisen in the last year is our loss of Teledyne sensors. So how many people were using Teledyne sensors before? Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, they've decided that it's too much of a liability-filled world to offer oxygen sensors to diving apparatus, so they're not offering sensors for diving anymore. At this point, just to give you an update, there is a new manufacturer that's coming online, and both the Inspiration and Evolution and the VR rebreathers have been tested with this new sensor, and they're working on CO2 or CE approval for those sensors, and I think that's pretty close. You guys pretty close to getting certification on those. So there is a new manufacturer that's coming online. I believe from what I last heard is that those sensors are only going to be made available for rigs that are CE approved and have been tested in a manufacturer-supplier agreed process. So is that your understanding as well? Yeah, okay. So, so we won't have any more Teledynes available to us in the future. Any questions so far?
You said that CO2 retention is greater when you're driving alone than saying when you drive solo.
Did I say that?
Diving in general.
Oh, diving in general. Yeah. Meaning diving enhances as opposed to being here at regular atmospheric pressure. Yeah. Thank you for correcting me. Anyone else?
I'll interpret from the Canadian.
Yeah. Sorry, I speak Canadian. Alan?
A few questions on,
Yeah.
out of all the manufacturers of rebreathers, does anybody, or has anybody come up with a checklist laminated, that if I got the discipline to go through this checklist before my dive? Has anybody come up with that?
Every manufacturer has a rig-specific checklist available that will come with the instruction manual for the rig and is available on their websites. So yes, every rebreather does have a checklist.
And if I can add to that.
Yeah.
We do, everybody does, but INTD, we worked with INTD to have a generic checklist that is supplied with every INTD rebreather class. That is not rig specific, that takes you through all the fundamentals. Is your gas turned on? If you check this and that. And it's laminated and ready to go. So there's multiple checklists out there. It's just people actually use them.
Yeah, that's really the issue. It's not the checklist. The checklist exists.
Right.
And you can add to the checklist yourself and add stuff specific to you, your unit, the way you dive, whatever. But you've got to follow it every time. Without fail.
Absolutely. And I think, every manufacturer will tell you, you've got to follow our checklist like to the T in order and everything. But I will sort of call out to many manufacturers have created checklists that are very onerous and very language heavy. And so you may have to simplify the language so that you have something that's very clear to you and simple enough that you will use it. So there's many available out there. I know Dive Gear Express actually has a lot of them on their website, links to all the ones of the rebreathers that they sell. So there's a common source where you can get a whole bunch. Rebreather Pro, my website, we have a heading that says checklists, and you'll see about 15 different ones for different rigs.
I had a quick question. I'm absolutely newbie at this.
Yeah.
How different are all these rebreathers? I mean, there must be an intrinsic overlapping similarity, but if we're using the same, I mean, what's
that's a really good question for people that are new to rebreathers, or even our experienced people. Basically you got a breathing loop.
Yeah.
You've got some way to take CO2 out of the loop. You've got some way to add oxygen back in for the diver to use. Some of them are very mechanical. Some of them are very electronics oriented with more monitoring. And some way to monitor your PO2 as well in every rig. But everybody's taken a different attack at that. And functionally, when it comes down to scrubbers, you're going to find a lot of things here that have 5 pounds of sorb in it. But 5 pounds of sorb is not 5 pounds of sorb is not 5 pounds of sorb. So it's a combination of many things. So the rebreather loop itself has certain resistive breathing characteristics if you're just breathing it right up here. The shape of the canister, the size of the mushroom valves, the size of the hoses, the way everything goes together, the counter lungs. And then the scrubbers themselves are in many different shapes and sizes, and that changes the velocity of the gas through the scrubber itself, the time that it dwells with the material and has an opportunity to have a chemical reaction occur. So 5 pounds is not 5 pounds is not 5 pounds. And so never think that just because you built a little PVC container in your garage that it's going to equal the same stats as a 5 pound scrubber on something that's been tested up here, because there are very different durations available in these different designs. So every manufacturer has their own little proprietary way to handle things to keep the sensors dry or to dry the sensors off with a burst of gas, or they've changed the loop dynamics with where different things are located so that the scrubber heat is helping to dry the rebreather head or do something else. So everybody has come up with a lot of different solutions for common issues. And so although they may on the surface look very similar, there's really a lot of very small things that make for a very different rebreather experience, as well as potentially a very different level of safety. So yeah, I would encourage everybody when we have break time to come up and ask common questions at different rebreathers from different manufacturers. Alan?
The other question I had was about blood gas analysis. That like if you go to the hospital and you see people are clipping things on your finger, oh yeah, you have this much oxygen, in your bloodstream at any time. And I think they could tell carbon dioxide and other gases, blood gases. Are there any higher level research folks looking at?
I don't know, that'd be really cool though. Although I'm still looking for the implantable gills and the oxy pill that I could just take before diving. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what we need to find out. Like, there's an interesting little sub story. There's a rebreather on the market with a gaseous CO2 monitoring in it that's sort of downstream in the loop, and this particular manufacturer, the rebreather's not out on the market yet, so I feel like I can go ahead and say this. It's still a developing rebreather. The manufacturer got into a pissing match with Simon Mitchell because he said, this is the way we're going to analyze CO2. And then he called Simon an idiot, basically, on the internet. And so Simon went into his, $3 million lab and said, I'm going to prove to this guy that I know what I'm doing. And basically proved that, unfortunately, the location of their CO2 monitor was such that it was just in the right location that it would account for the mixing of the dead airspace physiologically and the mouthpiece, and end up with a jumbled mess of gas that really wasn't giving you an appropriate picture of the CO2 state within the rebreather. So interesting stuff. Never question Simon Mitchell, or he just might throw $500,000 at a research at you.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Now, the manual units compared to the electronic units, I think, from all the stuff I've been reading, that more people are dying with the electronic units compared to the manual units because they're just, again, complacency. They're just relying on the electronic to take care of them, or you think the manual people are just...
I don't know if we really have enough statistics to be able to make a statement like that. I don't know if that's...
I think also in the aspect, and I'm a manual rebreather,
please.
but I would say that statistically, there are so many more automatic units out,
right,
and so many fewer manual units. And I don't think, even though you might look at a number and say, "Oh, it looks like that's it," statistically, I don't think we can make that statement.
Yeah, and I think also you have to imagine that it's an application-driven situation. A rebreather is a tool. I don't expect you or encourage you to get rid of your open circuit gear when you get a rebreather. A rebreather, in my opinion, is not the tool for every dive. I don't use it for every dive. And certain rebreathers might be great for one application and not for another. So, like in your case, as someone who's shooting video and photography, I'd never put you on a manual rebreather because you're busy. Your mind is busy with other things to do. And so a manual rebreather that's going to require a little more attention and injections and stuff like that probably isn't the rig for you. And I'd be the first one to tell anyone in the room when they say, Jill, which rebreather should I buy? I'd ask them a whole lot of questions about what they want to do with it and what their intentions are. And I might recommend any one of these rigs here at the table for one reason or another. So it is application specific and driven.
Or none.
Or none, yes, absolutely, or none. Well, let me turn the microphone over to someone else here.